So this is the third and final installment on the 1990 124 right-hand drive steering box reseal adventure. I've got to this stage by methods that I don't exactly approve of. There is a jam nut that holds down the central nut that sets the preload for the shaft bearings. That jam nut I removed basically with a hammer, tapping on one of the cutouts while it was securely held. It did slightly damage the nut. It lifted out some of the metal, so I actually ground it flat again for the purposes of reusing it. This is the central nut that sets the preload on those bearings. It does have a Teflon and rubber seal inside it. That's just what I'm changing now. So that's the O-ring that sits underneath the Teflon seal. I installed both of those new. First thing that goes in is the O-ring, and once that's seated correctly, the Teflon seal goes on top of that. That is the shaft seal. You've obviously got the external double lip seal as well. I changed that off camera. I did that on the day that I removed that jam nut in a manner that I wasn't particularly proud of. But at the same time, I'm not going to spend $1,000 US to get the correct tools to do this. I may one day, if I want to get serious about rebuilding steering boxes, but I don't think you have to actually go this far. As I've mentioned in previous videos, in Australia, all I've ever seen leak is the pitman arm external seal, and you don't even have to go this far to disassemble that. This is a universal pin wrench. I purchased it for the purpose of tightening up that central nut, but unfortunately it doesn't fit in there, but you can still use it like I'm doing here. And it really doesn't go up that tight. If you do it too tight, you put too much preload on the bearing, and then it's too hard to turn the shaft, and you'll destroy the bearings eventually. So I'm just doing it by feel. I don't have a friction meter. And this is the jam nut that then locks the whole assembly in place and prevents that central nut from loosening out. This again requires another special tool which I don't have, so I've used my pin wrench in a manner it was never designed for to tighten that up. To my astonishment, it actually worked. I did it in another method as well, by levering between the central nut and the jam nut. I'm not at all recommending this method. This is just what I did, and it worked for me. There are precise measurements that are supposed to be done here, but as I said, I don't have a friction meter, and I'm just doing this by feel. And that's rock solid. I couldn't even get that off again. I tried out of interest to loosen it, but I could not get it off again. So however the hell I've just tightened it is how it's going to stay. So it's then time to get on to the reassembly of the box. So the front cover O-ring can go on that cutout that it sits in. And there's also two additional O-rings for that front cover as well. There's an oil supply and oil return. There's little O-rings for that as well. And it's then time to start feeding the balls into that steering nut assembly. It says to feed the shaft in to the point where its first groove is visible in that upper hole. Now this is another difference with left and right hand drive cars. It tells you to turn it one direction in the manual, but on right hand drive it's actually the opposite direction you need to turn it. Otherwise you're not going to achieve anything. And it's just a case of feeding in all of the balls while rotating that shaft in the correct direction. And then the remaining balls, depending on which version box you've got, go in the external guide that fits between those two holes. It's all explained in the manual. I'm just following the manual. So there were no problems here. It all went exactly as planned. You can see the balls feeding in without any issues at all. Once it's filled up, you can see that there's balls visible in both of those openings, and the manual suggests actually packing one half of these guides with grease, obviously to hold the balls in there so they don't fall out everywhere. But I thought, screw it, I don't need to do that. I'm not going to have any problems dropping balls everywhere, and I didn't. It was actually pretty damn easy. I got the required number of balls into the guide, put both halves together quickly, put it into the housing while having my fingers just blocking the openings so that the balls couldn't drop out. And it was easy as that. No grease required. And then just putting down the clamping piece again. It didn't drop into the home position straight away. I did have to rotate the box or the steering nut back and forth as I'm doing right here, and then it's seated correctly. Now these locking plates that go with the screws, you're supposed to install new ones at the time of assembly. I'm not going to do that. It's almost Christmas. I got no chance getting any parts whatsoever this time of year, so I'm working with what I've got. I did clean them up. After tightening up those screws, they folded up perfectly fine, and I'm confident that they're not going to be a problem at all. And that's how I set up those locking plates. They're snugly against the heads of those screws, so they're not going to go anywhere. So that assembly is basically complete, and that's ready to go back into the steering box housing. Just making sure that it does move in and out without any binding. If you've got binding, you need to throw the whole box away. And these are the two additional O-rings that go for that front cover. One is the oil supplier and one is the return. The small opening there, you need to make sure that's not blocked according to the manual, because if it is, you're not going to get oil to the shaft bearings. And it actually feeds from there to the pitman arm shaft bearing as well. So yeah, it actually loops through there. This pretty much only goes in one way. I had a bit of an issue getting the housing to go in the whole way, but actually just flipping it on end fixed that. I'm just putting O-ring lubricant in here. This is not actually advised in the manual. I'm just doing it for my own benefit, because I don't like to have dry O-rings rubbing on metal. That's pretty much as far as I could get it in this position, but I soon found out that putting the box on end was the solution to that problem. It wasn't the position of the actual steering nut. It must have just been the O-ring that needed to seat correctly. and the extra weight applied to it by putting it on end like this allowed it to seat perfectly. So that assembly is now installed. It's just a case of putting in those front cover screws, and they're all torqued up to spec. You are supposed to install new screws. I did not. I don't care. The torque is not actually that great, so I think they'll be fine. And I'm happy with the way that's moving and the way that feels. And obviously this needs to be in the center position so that pitman shaft can go in the correct orientation. I'm just again doing something not mentioned in the manual. I'm lubricating the surfaces that have the O-rings rub against them as this is going back together. I never showed it in any of my videos, but there's a O-ring at the end of that pitman arm shaft in the housing. That needs to be changed. It's a bit of a pain, but I got there in the end with my custom made tools. I did put a photo of it on my community post. So once this shaft is in, you use the adjustment to screw it home. I don't think I showed you, but there's another small O-ring as well underneath that cover that's now bottomed out. So there is an additional small O-ring there for the oil supply. Don't forget to put that in. I did not, I just didn't show it. And these are now torqued up to spec as well. Again, I didn't use new bolts. I don't give a shit. And that's where that upper O-ring sits inside the housing. Quite a nightmare, but I got there in the end. The manual specifically mentions using a Loctite product for bonding the pitman arm to the shaft. I guess they're really worried about it falling off, but I don't think that's going to happen somehow, especially when there's a massive bolt going through there as well. And you've also got the snap ring at the end, so that's just MB being paranoid about safety as usual. I don't have a problem with that. I'm paranoid about safety myself, when I feel like it anyway. Of course this is supposed to be new, this bolt and nut as well, but I'm reusing it. It's fine. I don't recommend doing any of this. This is for your entertainment only. I suggest using the manual, but this is what I'm doing, and I'm happy with what I'm doing. Only thing I would change here is that final pitman arm adjustment probably should be done after you've set the adjustment of the pitman arm itself, that locking nut and whatnot up the top there. I did that after, and it did slightly upset my adjustment, but not by much. So that's exactly as it was when I disassembled it, but unfortunately after the adjustment it's slightly different now, but not even half a millimeter. And this is the snap ring going on. This is all new, it comes with the kit. Now there was only one thing that did not come with the kit. Actually 3 things didn't come with the kit. The copper crush washers for the in and out hydraulic connections on the top of the box. They were not present, or they were the wrong size, so I didn't disturb the original ones. And the compensator, this one here, the cap has a copper crush washer as well. That was missing from the kit, or it was the wrong size. So unfortunately I had to reuse this original one. If it leaks, it's not the end of the world, because that is easily accessible on right-hand drive cars. It's right at the bottom of the steering box. So that will be a piece of cake to change if it leaks. Hopefully it doesn't. And this is the final operation of the box. I wasn't able to get rid of all of the play from the pitman shaft. I think that's just wear and tear. There is no play whatsoever in the straight ahead position, so I'm happy with that. It's only when you're nearing full lock, and really that doesn't happen often anyway. So driving straight around, it's going to be good as far as I'm concerned anyway. The only possible issue is going to be a leak from there. And it's time to give this a bit of a crappy paint job after cleaning up or securing certain connections. I didn't go with any fancy colour, I just went with the same black that it was originally painted with. This is how I secured the steering wheel in the front ahead position. And then I just secured the steering box to the steering shaft. You cannot get this to go on with the bolt in that joint there. It has to have no bolt there. It's just another safety feature. If it loosens, it will still hold the box, but it will not come out unless the bolt's completely out. This was slightly annoying, getting these to go in, probably because I got paint in the threads on the steering box. I probably should have protected those holes. I didn't think of that at the time, but minor inconvenience, I suppose, in the grand scheme of things. And you're supposed to use new bolts here as well. Once again, I did not. I can't get anything this time of year, so it's going in whether it likes it or not. And I torqued it up to specification, which was 80 Newton meters. And it was time to finish off the assembly of the other steering components. Nothing here is rocket science. It's all pretty straightforward. Of course, you want to make sure these tie rods are around the right way. I did use my other car as a reference, so if they're wrong, it's because the other car is wrong as well. Hopefully they're not. And of course I torqued all of that up to spec as well. And people have asked me how I like to clean and paint my metal things. This is a caustic solution. As you can see, the grease and dirt comes off very easily once you have it in this solution. It's ridiculously easy. I'm hardly even pressing on this toothbrush. This is a heat shield to protect the ball joints from the exhaust temperature. It is supposed to have zinc plating on it. After 30 years, most of the zinc has gone anyway. I could get it replated, but I don't want to wait. I want to put it together now. So I'm just giving it a crappy paint job. You can hardly see it anyway, so it should look reasonable. So that's how it looked like after cleaning. No grease or dirt whatsoever. And it's time to fit the drag link and the steering damper. So my homemade painted shields are making their first appearance now. And all of this was torqued up to spec as well. The only real issue here is the shield likes to turn when you tighten up that nut, but I just held that with a screwdriver. And that's the drag link correctly installed and torqued to spec. And the last thing is for the Stabilis brand steering strut or damper to go in, and that's in now. And that's everything operating as it should. The front end of this car has not felt this precise or tight in 30 years, I'm sure. All in all, I'm damn impressed with the outcome here. Unfortunately, it's a while till I can drive this car, but every little bit gets me a bit more excited. I can't explain how damn good this feels. There's like almost no play whatsoever. This is just going to be absolutely awesome once there's a hydraulic pump running. I can't wait.